Ready? Okay. Afternoon, everybody. How y'all doing? Oh, it's my first DerbyCon experience. It's been awesome. I really enjoyed this con. I hope you guys have enjoyed this con too. How about that? Learned all kinds of great stuff. My name's Gene Bransfield, and I'm going to talk about why all this stuff is free. So, a little bit of introduction. I said my name's Gene Bransfield. I'm a PM for Tenacity Solutions. I'm an engineer for Tenacity Solutions. And if you spend any time with me, you're going to figure out pretty quick that I love my job. I'm getting on a plane tonight, and I'm flying home on the midnight shift so I can be at work at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning because my job is great. I do awesome stuff. And people ask me all the day, hey, man, what do you want to do? Because they want to come in, they want to take my job. And that's funny because they're never going to have my job. They're going to drag me dead. They're going to find me dead after a long weekend at my computer and drag me out when I'm 96 years old. It's great. So what's this talk about? We're going to be doing a brief look into computer history. We're going to be doing a quick look at learning open source operating software. We're going to talk about the theft of a kitty. And this talk is meant to both inform and entertain. It's about 45 minutes, so here we go. This talk started really with my buddy Rick Hill. I don't know if any of you guys know him. He's presented at DEF CON several times. Most recently, he put a pineapple on a drone, a quadcopter, and flew it up and down a beach and got all the packets and all the stuff and everything. I thought that was really cool. But Ricky's real love is SCADA. And SCADA systems, I don't know if you're very familiar with them, they pretty much operate large machinery and they're connected to the internet with Windows XP devices, and that's normally bad. And I was assisting him with the presentation to a bunch of lay people and customers, and the presentation consisted of turning an auto assembly plant into an auto disassembly plant. And I was looking out there showing them all this really cool stuff, and I could see the people that just wasn't really sinking in, and we were using a tool called Metasploit. I'm sure you've all heard of it. Very full-featured hacking platform. It turns the process of hacking almost into a point-and-click exercise. It's got a very user-friendly GUI. And I just did a quick segue away from Rick's presentation. It's like, how many people here know what Metasploit is? And no hands went up. I was like, how much do you think this stuff is going to cost? And people were like, I don't know, $20,000, $30,000. And I'm like, no, it's free. And everybody in the audience did this. They're like, what are you talking about? And some lady got very agitated in the very front row. She said, wait, how is all this stuff free? And I'm like, well, I don't know, because it is. So why? To help people learn how to hack. Who? What do you mean who? You, me, everybody. We can all learn how to hack. She's like, why would I ever need to learn how to hack? And I did the face. And said, I don't know. Why do I need to get my time card in at midnight? And she did this, and we stood there like we had a nervous problem. And she asked two very good questions. I mean, have you ever stopped to wonder why all this stuff is free? I mean, the amount of powerful software that you can just download off the internet. But she asked another good question. Why would you ever need to learn how to hack? And it's like, okay, so let me put it into a scenario. One of my other pet projects is trying to communicate with people who are outside of our community here because we are very insular. We sit here and talk to each other how bad stuff is. And then people who are walking through the lobby who are the users who are mostly affected by this malware because, they're not getting on my box, but they are getting on his box and his box. And they walk by and they're like, ew, hackers. So I'm trying to reach out to the community. So I'm come up with a scenario that would help them understand. So I said, okay, imagine I'm sitting at home. And I'm feeling, kind of okay about this. Nobody's bothered me in about, I don't know, an hour. And it suddenly dawns on me that this is not normal. I start looking around for my wife's kitty. It's like, where's the kitty? And then I get this wonderful email from this individual I've never heard of before. He says, send money now or the kitty dies. And I'm like, woohoo! Kitty's gone, and I don't do anything about it. Yeah! My life's just got a whole lot better, but my wife was not happy with that answer. And after several hours of gentle encouragement, she convinced me that I have to do something about it. So I'm like, okay, what do I do? So the guy says not to call the police, but he did contact me via email. So could I hack him? Well, why not? Challenge accepted. But then I'm like, wait a minute. Let's say I don't know how to hack. Where do I learn? What should I do? And how much is this going to cost me? Well, we've already gone over that part. It's free. But how is it free? That's a good question, and she says, get to it quickly because there's a kitty in peril. So thus begins the history lesson. And I geek out on stuff like this every once in a while. People are just like, why do they call it port and starboard? I'm like, I don't know. Let me find that out. And I'll spend like 3 or 4 hours of my day researching topics like that. So that's why I really enjoyed doing something like this. So let's start with this guy. Who's this guy? Where my nerds at? Where's this guy? Oh, he's not here. Damn. No, so this is Cornelius Vanderbilt. So what the hell about Cornelius Vanderbilt? Well, he was one of the original captains of American industry. He was a shipping mogul that then saw the development of the railroads. And he realized how much money could be made using the railroads. But the railroad system back in the early days of railroads, every mom and pop had a railroad. And no one railroad matched the other railroad. So if you wanted to go from one half of the city to the other half of the city, you have to change trains. The trains could not interoperate with each other because the tracks were different sizes. The cars were different sizes. The schedules were not standardized. It was a bloody mess. So what Cornelius Vanderbilt is, he came in, he bought all the railroad things. He set a good standard, he built everything up and made it a very modern, efficient mechanism of national travel, basically revolutionized the other thing. But the other thing he did was he made it cool to have a monopoly because you're ridiculously rich. And that appeals to a lot of high-powered individuals such as J.P. Morgan, John Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, all of which went out and bought all the things, made them much better, and became billionaires. Unfortunately, the downside of monopolies is they tend to oppress people, so we have a whole bunch of antitrust legislation, including the Sherman Act, Clayton Antitrust Act, FTC. The American government started to push back on monopolies and started really pushing them out of favor. And then we have this guy. Who's this? Anyone? No, that's Theodore FDR. What? Okay. This here is Theodore Vail, the president of American Telephone and Telegraph from 1907 to 1919. And much as Cornelius Vanderbilt came into the scene when the railroads were getting hot, Theo came along when the telephone system was getting hot. And we had the same kind of early adoption problems. There was a whole bunch of mom and pop carriers out there. And you couldn't, in those days, if I belonged to mom and pop 1 and you belonged to mom and pop 2, I couldn't call you because we had to do the exchange and it sucked. And so Theodore Vail started buying up and breaking down the competition. He had an idea that the American government and the American people would benefit from a one policy, one system, universal service, and he was marketing that as he went around. But he took hardcore tactics against people. He'd go into a town, he'd buy up everybody who would sell to him, and those who wouldn't sell to him, he'd surround them with his stuff and undersell the person who was holding out on him. Furthermore, AT&T owned all the long-distance service. So he would deny anybody who wouldn't sell to him, he would deny them long distance. Well, that was cool for a while when the telephone system was just sort of, a fun thing to have in your house. But when it started to become the basis of the American communication system, this is now starting to get a matter of national security, and the federal government threatened to intervene, and nobody wants that. So AT&T did something really smart. They went to the federal government and they said, hey, we will be the monopolistic system. We will deliver the quality of service you desire, and we will do it at an affordable price. So in 1913, we had the Kingsbury Commitment, which consolidated AT&T, and the AT&T also owned a bunch of other things that made them happy. But they said, nope, you have to sell all those other things. You have to seek ICC approval to buy independent carriers. You have to provide long-distance service to everybody, and everybody in America has to have a telephone. But AT&T got their official monopoly. But they still had to deal with government setting prices, and had to go to the FCC every time they wanted to increase prices. And by the way, the Department of Justice still hated monopolies because that's what the Department of Justice did at the time. They were still very much anti-monopolistic. So with all those restrictions in place, AT&T had to innovate in order to make a profit. And if you were a geek, everybody in this room in 1925, you wanted to work at Bell Labs because that's where all the cool stuff was, and it was federally funded, and they had a lot of money, and a lot of cool stuff came out of Bell Labs, including radio astronomy, the transistors, and the fiber optic cable. The fiber optic cable was thought of back in the 1950s, when if you're in New York and you're running a telephone system in New York, a lot of people in New York, not a lot of room for telephones, telephone cables. So there's all underground, this huge, massive cable. And some guy came in with one PowerPoint slide. It's like, here's the size of the cables that we have to run for a couple blocks in New York. And here's the size of a fiber optic cable. Give us money. I said, wow, that's awesome. And that's what they did. One slide. I want to do that sometime in my career. So getting back on topic, in order for AT&T to start making money, they had to find more efficient ways to do business. And there is nothing more efficient in the world than computers. So In 1965, Bell Labs got together with GE and IBM and MIT to start working on a system called Multics. And the idea behind Multics was that you could have one computer that allowed multiple users to use it at the same time and do so in an efficient manner. Well, they threw a bunch of geeks in a room and tried to work on it for about 4 years. And in 1969, they had a system that worked, but it wasn't efficient enough for AT&T to make a profit. AT&T cried uncle and pulled out of that. Unfortunately, two guys who just got out of graduate school, Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie, they just got there. They'd been there for a couple months, and they thought, wow, this is the coolest, newest, bleeding-edge stuff. We're going to work on multiple user experience computers, and we're so happy to be here. And then AT&T pulled the rug out of them and pulled them back up to New Jersey, and nobody wants to be in New Jersey. So they're sitting there, and they're kind of bummed out about it. And what's the one thing that hackers like almost as much as hacking? Or perhaps in some certain cases more than hacking, and the answer is not porn. Telling people? How about games? Gaming. Wow. Everybody said, wow, I'm so disappointed. So this game that Ken Thompson really loved was called Space Travel, and he played it probably a little bit too much, which is probably why they pulled him back to AT&T Bell Labs. And so he loved the game, but when he got back to work, all he had to play this game on was this little used PDP-7, and the operating system sucked for his game. So he did what any good geek would do. He said, let me redesign a new operating system to support my game. Besides, I really like working on the Multics stuff anyway, and I think I can do it better than anybody else. So his wife went on vacation, and during that time, he developed a shell, an editor, an assembler, and thus the means to copy, print, delete, and edit files in about a month. This guy is a nerd. And voila, Unix was born. And just so everybody knows, that's what a PDP-7 looks like. Yeah, that's one computer. One. So where are my nerds at? Who are these guys? I gave you hints earlier. That's right. That's Dennis Ritchie standing up and Ken Thompson sitting down at the computer. So who was the first customer for Unix? Anyone? Bueller? IBM. Good guess, but Bell Labs patent department, because they now had a means via which they can sit and edit files without having to kill all sorts of trees. And the file editor that they had to use was VI. Can you imagine writing a patent document using VI? VI, the editor of the beast. Yes, it's a pain in the butt, but you know, it was better than anything they had at the time. And it took off like gangbusters, and these guys are like, wow, this is really cool. We could sell this to major corporations where we make a ton of money. We're going to make a fortune. But in 1949, there was an antitrust suit brought by DOJ against AT&T. It was settled in 1956. It says AT&T can only do telecommunications. Unix was a computer and not a telephone. Therefore, it pseudo belonged to the federal government, and AT&T Bell Labs had to license it to anybody who asked for it. And there was much crying. Yes. So in 1972-ish, it was free to people who could afford large computers like a PDP-7, which pretty much limited it to the federal government and educational institutions. So in Stanford, you had Sun OS. In Berkeley, they came out with BSD, but then they sent it to MIT, and that's where we get this guy. Who's he? Ah, there we go. That's Richard Stallman, RMS, who graduated with a BS in physics from Harvard in 1974. He was a grad student at MIT for physics, but then he switched over to computer programming and fell in love with the hacker culture at the MIT Artificial Intelligence Lab, which is actually where they called themselves hackers. That's where the term hackers came from, a little bit of trivia. But Richard Stallman was a bit of an extreme intellectual. He advocated the sharing and open study of code for the betterment of society and humanities. Like software wants to be free. It needs to be free. It desires to be free. And don't you dare put anything restricting software. And basically, he was a damn dirty hippie. But his antics were legendary. One of his things that he started to become famous for is like DARPA funded a machine up in the MIT AI lab space. And they put it in there, and being a government agency, a security conscious government agency, they wanted only their users to be able to use this DARPA-funded machine. So they put passwords on all the user accounts. So Stallman was irritated by this because he wanted all code to be free. So they broke into the computer. He decrypted all the passwords, and he sent emails to all the users with their passwords in plain text in the email saying, why don't you just change your password to 1234 so to make it easier for me? The other thing he had with the laser printer, he got really pissed off because in those days, laser printers was not something that you had on your desk, beaconing Wi-Fi because nobody locked it down. They had to, when you sent a print job to the laser printer, you walked out the door, down the hall, up 4 flights of stairs right there next to the men's room and go down another flight of stairs, and the laser printer's in the back room. So you sent your print jobs, you weren't sure if it made it, you weren't sure when or if they were going to be done. And if they did get done, well, then great. Otherwise, you were like walking there constantly. But Stallman got pissed at this, so he reprogrammed the code on the laser printer such that when you sent it a print job, it sent you back an email that says, I got your print job. When your print job was done, it would send you another email that says your print job's done. Good on you, come get it. But they switched out the laser printer, and they bought proprietary code and did not give Mr. Stallman the access to the source. So now he had to go back to the old way of doing things, which was walk down the hall and go up the stairs, down by the men's room, turn right. And he hated that, and he ranted about it for weeks at the lab. But the thing that really sent him over the edge was the whole Lisp and LMI and symbolic situation. And Lisp was their main operating system language, their main programming language that they were promoting at MIT at the time. It was very, very advanced for its time. And it could be used in all sorts of commercial applications, and everybody realized that. And even though they're geek nerds, they would love to make $1 million. So 2 companies came out of the AI lab. One was Lisp Machines Incorporated, and the other one was Symbolics. And LMI was much more of a hacker culture-centered group of individuals. They solicited business first, got payment, and then went out there, whereas Symbolics was very business-oriented. They went out, got venture capital, took a corporate action, and decided to play very hard business tactics, try to put their competition out of business. Stallman was the only guy who pretty much didn't leave MIT for this situation. So he's left at the lab manning the ship. And they had an agreement between MIT and both of these companies that they could use MIT's Lisp code, and any changes they made would get sent back to MIT. Well, Symbolics pretty much quickly figured out that all the hard work they were doing, LMI was taking up, and they didn't feel like they were getting good stuff back from LMI. So they went back to MIT and says, we will give you our source code, but you cannot include it in your MIT Lisp code. You have to keep it, and feel free to use our stuff. We'll give it to you for free, but you can only use our stuff. You can't share it with anybody. So this sent Stallman through the ceiling. He's like, now they're making me choose between the 2 companies, and both companies have my friends in it, and I really hate this Symbolics company anyway. And so that's when the craziness started. Symbolics would send code to MIT, and Symbolics was noticing that subsequent releases from MIT included functionality that was included in the code that they just gave them. And they're like, we told you not to do that. And they're like, we did. And they're like, well, what's going on? So basically a little bit of investigation on Symbolics' part determined that what Stallman would do was he'd take the beta release notes, figure out what they were doing, and recode everything by hand from scratch by himself and include it in the distribution from MIT. Can you imagine the hate fire burning in a man to make him do something like that? But that's how pissed off he was. And he did that for 2 years. Are you kidding me? God. So, but even Stallman could see the writing on the wall. And the 1980s came around the corner. Proprietary software was big business. They came out with even smaller machines running completely commercial software. And he knew the gig was up when he came around the corner one day and saw a completely unused PDP-10 machine. I showed you a PDP-7 machine. PDP-10 was bigger. And all the blinky lights shall blink no more. And he just remembered all the good times he had with his buddies. And he said that he just sat there and cried because he realized that things had changed and he couldn't do anything to reverse it. But he's resolved then and there to build a free operating system or die trying of old age, perhaps. So in 1984, Stallman resigned from MIT. In 85, Stallman founded GNU, which is operating system code free for everybody. And shortly thereafter, he founded the Free Software Foundation. And now you get to the GNU public license that came out with GNU. It contains, I'm not going to get deep dive in it. I'm not your lawyer, nor am I a lawyer. So, but at the 90,000-foot high-speed flyby thing, if you develop something in GNU, you have to share it. You can't restrict others from using it, changing it. You have to share it with everybody. Everybody gets in the mix and starts coding together, and it makes a lot of really cool stuff free. So as a result of this influence, he opened up this very cool open association hacker type sharing culture that we have. Most major hacking products, even full operating systems, are created using GPL, including Linux, Open Everything, Hacksaw tools, all available online for free. Can you believe that? Imagine your life if you would have to pay for a C compiler or Perl. Well, I imagine if you're using Perl, you're paying for it anyway. Python. Imagine if you had to pay for Python. It's all there for free. And nobody ever thinks about it. They just download it and go. It's awesome. And the layperson would be like, hey, that's great, but remember at the very beginning, there's a Kitty in peril. So let's get back to rescuing the Kitty. So what resources are available? Of course, you all know about Backtrack, and it's now Kali, of course. All your hacking tools condensed into one open source distribution. It runs from CD, it runs on USB, it runs in VirtualBox. Anybody in here ever take a look at the list of the tools that are available on Backtrack and try to download the source code and compile them yourself and get it on one distro? I can tell you from practical experience, it's a screaming pain in the butt. And every time I see Mutz, I thank him for producing this because it would take months and months to just do it yourself. Metasploit, of course, comes with Backtrack. You don't have to do anything special. Well, you have to update the distro, but it's great. It's just there, ready for use. You can be like go from nothing to honing in like half an hour, depending on your internet connection. Yeah, but what about training? Let me Google that for you. Google is your friend. Backtrack right here. If you look, you just how to anything on Backtrack. It comes up. Installing to the hard disk. Installing Backtrack persistent to the USB with full disk encryption. Who does that? Who just puts instruction manuals out there like that? We do. Why? GPL. Richard Stallman. It's great. What about Metasploit? Let me Google that for you. It's there. You just go to the internet. How do I use this crazy open source hacking tool that can bring down major corporations? Well, there's a web page over here. Start step 1, step 2. It's right there. And then you go out to VirtualBox, and they've got all kinds of stuff, everything you wanted to know. There's even an article on here on advanced networking for Linux. Name one other industry that gives you all this information out there for free. And all you have to do is read. And you're like, Gene, I don't want to read. And that's great. You don't have to. It's on YouTube. People take the time out of their day to figure out how to work this stuff and then take videos of it and put it up there for you to learn. People learn much faster using videos. And of course, there's all the websites. You probably know that. And layperson's like, that's great. Good hacker tools, but you're forgetting the Kitty. So let's get to hacking this bastard. Okay, you examine the picture of the Kitty for EXIF stuff. He's got a crappy camera, so no dice. You examine his email headers and see what you can learn about his machine. You figure out he's using an old and busted version of Microsoft Outlook, which probably comes with an old and busted version of Microsoft, which is vulnerable to just about everything. So you bring up Backtrack, or Kali. You use Metasploit to create a user-side attack against this old and busted Microsoft system. And you send an attack email with the subject line, I got the money, please don't hurt my Kitty. And you wait for the idiot to open his present. So idiot opens his present and he sends you an email back saying, hey, the PDF you sent didn't work. And so, oh, it worked. You get access to his computer. You download TrueCrypt, very powerful open source encryption tool available on the internet for free. And you encrypt everything on his hard drive. And you send an email offering a password exchange for the Kitty and $10,000. Evil laugh here. So now he's open to negotiation. He's like, dude, all my favorite important videos and pictures were on that device, and including like the only known picture of my grandma, but she's not in the profile. Dude, I'm broke. I'm stealing kitties for a living. I don't have $10,000. So I don't want to. We exchange a password for the cat. He gets his password and is happy with his pictures and videos. I get the kitty back, and now the wife is happy, but I'm not happy. Yes, that's my couch, and that's a bad kitty. So what have we learned? Most of the vicious, diabolical, nasty hacking tools that can bring down major corporations, vital infrastructure, even the U.S. government itself are available online for free with plenty of tutorials. And very smart and dedicated people sacrificed much and did a lot of hard, crazy work to make it that way for you. You owe it to them to learn as much as you can. And in the meantime, I mean, shit, I've walked around here, learned all kinds of stuff this weekend. I'm having a good time, but I learned all kinds of new skills. Everybody can learn new skills online for free. And if you do something you love, you'll never work a day in your life. It's great. I highly recommend it. So then you may end up sending a kitty someday. Oh, PC announcement, no kitties were harmed in the making of this presentation. Presenter does not advocate the hurting of kitties for personal entertainment, while he acknowledges it can be very personally entertaining. Hack at your own risk if you derp yourself. That's funny. Any questions? Nope. I'm sorry? Oh, why is it named Port and Starboard? Great. Yes. Back in the day, in the early days of navigation, you didn't have this big ship where you could steer from the center. You had one dude with an oar off the back, holding on to the oar and guiding the ship that way. Since most people were right-handed, he stood on the right-hand side of the ship. So as not to smash said oar, when they docked they docked on the other side of the boat, and therefore that side of the boat became port. And because of the Old English pronunciation and dudes not being able to speak very well in England in the first place, they're calling it steering board and port. And steering board got munged into starboard, and the English Navy just called it that, because it's a lot easier to determine port and starboard in a raging storm than it is to say right and left. That's why. Any other useless knowledge you want? Why is the sky blue? Because if it was green, we wouldn't know where to stop mowing. Anything else? Thank you guys, I appreciate it.